I speak to Jerry Fu about conflict with cultural expectations and how culture is constantly changing. We discuss how the individual and the employer can navigate the complexities of cultural expectations and how to have a healthy conflict. I share the Maverick Leader view, which reduces the complexity of culture conflict to the fundamentals of leadership. I also ponder the impact of cultural identity on how you identify yourself. Is it possible to stay true to yourself? Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Jerry Fu. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, everybody.
How you doing?
I am good. How about you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I am looking forward to this conversation. But before we begin, who are you?
Yeah, so many hats to wear. I am a son and brother and friend and Christian and pharmacist and conflict resolution coach and cook and musician and salsa dancer and amateur stand-up comedian. I think are some of the ones that come to mind whenever someone asks me that.
And the only one I think stands out a little bit strange is the pharmacist.
Yeah, of all the things to pick, right?
So is that what you're doing as well? Did you move away from that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's what I went to school for originally. I was a biology major in college and initially liked the idea of being pre-med and going to be a doctor, like so many other Asian parents hope their kids will end up. And when things didn't quite turn out the way I wanted it to, or they wanted it to, I said, well, I still want to do something in healthcare. And so I said, well, pharmacy looks pretty good. So I ended up going to pharmacy school. And so I still have a day job as a pharmacist, but I did officially start my leadership coaching, conflict resolution coaching business in October during COVID. So that is in early stages, trying to, get this plane off the ground. But I am still thankful that my day job lets me pay my current bills until I'm able to get a transition full-time into coaching.
You know what? That's a really great way of doing it. Having that regular income so you can invest in your own development, get things going until you reach the point where you have to pick one or the other. So that's a really great start. Yeah,
I'm grateful for it for sure.
Right. So one of the things I'm going to talk to you about then is conflict, but around cultural expectations. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah. It's something I've dealt with my whole life. So my parents came over to the US for grad school initially. So, they grew up in Taiwan with a certain set of expectations and, cultural norms and definitions of success. And, they are justified, but maybe not always effective when you kind of pull the plant out of its native habitat and you try to, plant it in a different kind of soil, right? To use one kind of analogy. And so when I was born here in the US and I saw, a contrast between what my parents were telling me and then what other people were telling me. And even when I was going outside the house, right, there's all sorts of different schools of thoughts that you can buy into because, it's not insular like Taiwan is, where you have a limited set of influences. Here, there's influences everywhere, telling you what to buy, what to wear. And so you start to see this discrepancy between what your parents are telling you need in order to be successful, and then you see other people doing things that you wish you could do or would love to have an idea of how to do, but then for some reason we're told, no, that's for them but not for you. Like, this is, you need stability, you need consistent income, and keep that stability because that is important. And on one hand, it is, you do want, anyone would want stable income, I think, for the rest of their lives. But at the same time, I think people sacrifice a little too much of what their quality of life in order to maintain that stability.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're saying that most of the conflict with culture expectations is with parents, or the other? What about your employer?
Oh, of course. It's that's just, the parents are mainly the primary influence when you're growing up, right?
Yes.
And then as you start to branch out, right, you go to school, and your parents aren't necessarily there to see and filter everything that you're exposed to. And then you go to college, right? And if you don't go to college, even if you go to college nearby your home, right, there's still a number of things your parents aren't going to play goalie for. And then you get a job, right? And then what your employer does and says and their style of leadership may be different from your parents. And not just maybe, it most likely will be, because the chances that your employer comes from the same cultural cloth as your parents is very unlikely, at least, in this global setting. And so all of a sudden, it's not just familial culture conflict or societal culture conflict. Now you have a work culture, right? And depending on how effective or competent a leader or owner you have at that company will dictate the kind of culture that you're dealing with. So just because you may have a good idea on how to communicate and you may seem well adjusted, if you step into an environment that is hostile and passive aggressive and likes to crack the whip, all of a sudden, right, now you have conflict.
I like the fact that what you're saying is that it's almost like we all walk and live in our own cultural bubble.
Mm-hmm.
But as we interact with other people, it's how we can adjust, maintain that cultural bubble around others that drives the conflict.
Yes.
So what does somebody do if, okay, there's two ways of looking at it, I suppose. There's the conflict that you have as an individual with your own cultural expectations. And then it's the conflict that others have with you based on what they think your culture is.
It's so many layers.
It is very, very layered. And I actually did go on a little workshop on cultural conflict. And what I liked about the person who did it says something like, culture is it's not static, it's constantly adapting as you meet other people, do more things, and go into different places. So I thought I'd never thought of it like that. So how does an employer or a business owner deal with the fact that one of their employees' culture is constantly changing against what you're expecting?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's I guess in what I've seen when companies handle conflict well and different cultures well, I think the owners and the leaders, the upper management leadership, really they take a stance of humility, right? And they actually take the time to get to know their employees and their backgrounds and what makes them tick and what they're striving for, right? It sounds easy. It sounds straightforward. You think that makes sense for a lot of people, but I don't think it happens as often as we'd like to think that it does. Because so often, right, the owners or people who start businesses, they say, hey, we have a business strategy, we have an idea of what our target is, and we build the bridge. We have an idea of how to get there, and we just need to implement that with whoever is grateful enough for the opportunity we're giving them, right? And they have they're more about conformity than they are about collaboration. And but I would suggest an alternative approach to say, hey, where are you from? What kind of pressures are you dealing with? What motivates you to really work hard and strive and, give you a sense of purpose and satisfaction with your work. Okay, thank you for telling us that. Now, here is what the company is doing. Where do you see overlap? Where do you see discrepancies, right? And how do you want to, how would you solve this discrepancy or reconcile this if you were in charge, right? And now you're empowering the employee. Now you're showing them, hey, we see you, we respect you, we're betting on you to help us get to the finish line. And, we are going to trust that you have talents, you have drives, you are human, and we want you to be involved with the success of this company, right?
I think that makes a lot of sense. What sprang to mind was a couple of things. One was, what do you say to the manager that says, oh, well, that's just too much work because there are many cultures here. In my team, there's five different cultures that I can identify. You want me to honestly sit and speak to each one and make adjustments for each one and then still try to do my job. I don't have time for that. How would you respond?
Yeah, great. That pushback is inevitable, dude. It's like, you're like, that might be a good idea. I still don't want to do it. I think what the wake-up call I had when I would avoid the hard work of building relationships is I've realized recently I had to ask myself, what is the long-term cost if I don't establish a good foundation? And maybe I ask them that and they say, well, hey, if you're not willing to, to build a solid foundation and you just want to give directives, what do you think is going to happen in the long run, right? Do you think these people are going to stick around to work for a manager who doesn't really feel like they care about them? Are we willing to deal with, a higher level of turnover and the costs that come with having to train new employees constantly because there's no continuity and to take extra time in order to develop that continuity over and over and over again, right? Is that something you're willing to endure if you are not going to actually care about the people who are working for you, right?
See, being the Maverick,
mm-hmm.
I think I've got an easier solution.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Which is this: I think effective Maverick leaders have a few kind of baseline rules of engagement, which is for themselves as leaders: work for the great good, do no harm, or at least do the least amount of harm possible, diversity of thought, and the individual is the individual. And I think if you have those principles, it's less work. So, i.e., do what's great for the great good. That's very obvious. Do no harm. Very obvious. Diversity of thought. Like, we're smarter as a team if we have different perspectives. So let's seek out the different people with different expectations and perspectives to allow us to create something amazing. And always treating the individual in front of you as the fact that they're an individual. So rather than trying to have all these different, because you run the risk of stereotyping, don't you? You might go, oh yeah, Asian. I know what that culture's like. It's like, it's not one culture, right? It's like, no, and all that kind of stuff. And then you end up kind of, whereas if you just, I'm going to lead, treat everyone as individual with respect, and to do the least amount of harm as possible so that we're all working towards the greater good, then I think you naturally pick up those cultural things.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? When you need collaboration. And the interesting thing is that the relationships are strong enough, right? You don't have to be afraid of conflict. Like, there's a healthy conflict and an unhealthy conflict. Unhealthy conflict, right? Like, there's broken expectations, there's unresolved problems, and people are just avoiding. Either they're afraid to communicate their expectations, or even if they do it in a way that's antagonistic. But when there's healthy conflict, right? Because in a business, one thing I've learned in my training is that good priorities that are both necessary for a business's success are actually in conflict, right? Teamwork and results are both necessary, and yet they're kind of, pull in different directions. And same thing with innovation and systems, right? Systems are saying, hey, we have a good process in place. We'd rather not adjust it any more than we have to. And innovation says, hey, if we stick with what we're doing 5 years from now, we might be out the door, right? And so there are times when, after you've had this discussion collaboration, the leader still may have to say, okay, based on everything I'm hearing, this is what I'm going to do. But even for the people who may disagree with that, they can understand, hey, we felt heard. They heard our stance. I gave my pushback, but they gave their reasons why they're still doing this. And even though I disagree, I can still trust that they're acting in ultimately what is the best interest of the company. Because as leaders, we know that we have to make difficult, unpopular decisions, and everyone knows this. But when rubber hits the road, right? Oh, I don't want to upset anybody, and I don't want anybody to feel bad. And it's like, well, no, you're gonna have to rip that Band-Aid off, but you're gonna also have to trust that the relationship has enough integrity to withstand that kind of disagreement.
I do like that, especially the idea of healthy conflict, because I think Maverick leaders know that there's conflict all the time. And because there's conflict all the time, there's no need to fear it. Because I guess Maverick leaders tend to see words as neutral. So conflict, it doesn't have a negative load to it. As a term, it's just conflict. So whereas people tend to see it as a negative, so they fear it. Whereas, as you're collaborating, a healthy conflict is what's needed to get the best solution. Otherwise we have groupthink. Or you have a homogeneous view of something, which is a bit like what's it called? Protective equipment, like say police protective equipment, designed for the male body. So not, and I think the same with army stuff as well. So it's not very good for the female body. So they're not as protective, and it's actually damaging. So you've got women that are off sick with bad backs, for example, because they can't, because the way things are distributed and the way it works doesn't fit the female body, for example. And that's a nonsense when you think about it, that kind of design thing, because 50, maybe once upon a time when there were no women, it would, or one or two, maybe not such a big deal. But when you've got a more closely gender balance, then you have to think about that percentage of the population that is not being protected. Or
because
long-term sick.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about this out loud with you, there have been plenty of business failures because someone didn't speak up and disagree, right? Like, an example that's come up recently was the Quaker acquisition of Snapple, right? And, they acquired the company for $1.8 billion. They ended up selling it for $300 million, which is a sixth of the original price, right? And then even the Quaker CEO, who basically lost his job or was forced to resign after this, ginormous failure, but said, hey, you know what? Maybe we should have had some people in the organization arguing against this. And then it's like, you're going to admit that now? Wow. That's a pretty big admission, right? Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting is like Maverick leaders, when there's nobody arguing, will take that position, even if they don't agree with it, just so that there's a healthy debate. And I know that I have done that many a time. And I've learned over the years to say, I'm just being devil's advocate, as opposed to people think I'm schizophrenic because I've gone from one position to another. But it's just like, I'm uncomfortable that we've proposed this and everyone's in agreement after like 1 minute of discussion. So let me just point out all the things why it might not work, just so that we have that conversation. Makes everybody stronger though, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I know, because I've been on both sides, where on one hand, you're just like, I have a good idea. Why are you so opposed to it? Why are you being such a pessimist? And then the other hand, you're just like, you know what? Maybe we should have more people like helping us anticipate the barriers that we didn't see initially, because we were just so spotlighted on our own desire for just seeing the outcome we wanted. So yeah, it's this funny balance of, okay, well, we need some level of caution, right? Someone needs to be able to point out, things that could go wrong. And then we don't want to dismiss them just because, we think they're just being, they just have a bad attitude or something like that. So, yeah.
And I think that comes down to the reputation of that individual, isn't it?
True.
And the intention of that person. So when we first started off, we said there was two things around cultural expectations, and the one we haven't really addressed is parental expectations. So are you, let me get this right, are you thinking about, I don't know, maybe an immigrant parent, whichever flavour that looks like, because as soon as you move somewhere, you're an immigrant, aren't you? So,
yeah, by default, you're like, nope, I am not here. Yeah,
I wasn't born here. I'm an immigrant. So if an immigrant from whatever flavour or whatever part of the world is in a country, and their children are then raised in the culture of the host country, as it were. So are you talking, is that what you mean by parental expectations, that you can't, I don't know, you can't drink because this culture doesn't drink, or you can't dye hair or have a tattoo or whatever it happens to be? Is that what you mean?
No, it's a good question. I mean, the distinction is, I mean, you can have, parental expectations conflict regardless of whether or not, you're born in the country or not, right? I know plenty of parents that are like, my kid has to be an accountant or an engineer or a doctor. And that's true regardless of, whether or not you're an immigrant, because they have this definition of success, right? But it is just all the more magnified, I believe, when you are an immigrant and you say, okay, now I have to remember that the society that I'm in does not necessarily align with, what I'm telling my kids, right? And now I have to help my kids. I think the mature thing to say is to say, hey, I need to help my kids navigate this new territory. And I'm going to have to do a whole lot of learning myself to make sure that even if it's not my place to necessarily filter everything, because there's only so much you can protect, but to help them, give them the tools to navigate their territory well, right? And just equip them, give them confidence to be able to discern information that they're getting, and even allow them to disagree. Because as kids, right, I know how much I want to just fit in and feel like I belong. But I also understood that I engaged in, activities or other things that I would not have normally done for myself. And I should have been able to have more courage to say no to certain things, right? It's not like anything like illicit drugs or anything like that, but point being, right, like peer pressure that makes us do a lot of things that we wouldn't normally do, right? And so to be able to say, I'm going to be true to myself and what I believe is important as I figure this out is okay. It is okay for people to disagree with me.
I suppose it comes down to how much is your culture a part of your identity.
Yeah.
Because you can come from a culture and not identify with it, can't you?
True. Yeah.
How do you avoid losing? So let's assume that you want to retain the culture of your parents or, your community, but you end up having to be somewhere where the culture is quite different. How do you hold on? How do you avoid that internal conflict between I want to keep myself as I was raised or in this community expectation, however, this other community here, maybe it's the work community or where you currently live in or new country, wants me to be something else. How do you stay true to yourself?
Yeah. Great question, and definitely no easy answers to this. But if people are listening for a solution, we're going to give them one. So here we go. I think, right, what an expression I used recently is to tell people, hey, if you want to run a marathon, join a bunch of marathoners, right? Like there's nothing better to maintain something important to you than to find other people who also hold that same belief, right? And in a world that's global and more connected than ever with technology, you don't necessarily need that community to be local in order to get plugged in with someone, right? So I guess the first answer I would try to say, to recommend people to try, is just to say, okay, I have this culture. It's a part of me, right? I like it. I am proud of it. I celebrate my heritage. Who else in my community, in the room, building, or street, right? Who else shares this belief with me? Do I know anyone locally? How do I get in touch with them? right? I remember when my parents grew up, where we grew up, and there would be local Chinese and Taiwanese associations, and we would always join them and do their social events. And, as kids, we just said, why is this part of our calendar, right? But as you start to grow older and you get some more awareness, you say, hey, you know what? My family did a lot of hard work to give me this opportunity, right? To live where I live now. And they sacrificed a lot. So let me be grateful for the things that they did, right? Instead of just resenting the fact that they're like imposing their, definition of success on me because they care. So the first step I would say is to say, okay, once you've figured out what you like about your culture and how you want to preserve it, look around, right? Who else is like, what's in your territory that you can leverage to maintain that? Whether it's, you say, hey, learning to speak Mandarin is important to me. Hey, there's plenty of meetup groups, right? There's plenty of free language learning software. Let me use that to my advantage, right? And then the second step, I would say is just to, show it off. Like if you're excited about what your culture has to offer, then just find, tasteful, appropriate ways to share it with people at work or other things like that. I remember with the first like international quote potluck that I had in like 6th grade. And I remember seeing, all these weird foods, right, that I hadn't seen before, but now, man, like my palate is so adventurous. Like there are so many delicious foods everywhere. And now I just want to try it. Thankfully, Houston has a great range of restaurants. You can try just about anything. But so on one hand, find a nucleus that is in line with what's important to you about your culture. And then invite people just to learn and enjoy what you enjoy about your culture. I think those are the 2 simple steps I would recommend for anybody, really.
Thank you. I think that's really useful. It just made me have a think about what happens if you come from a culture which looks similar to another culture, but it isn't your culture. So how do you remain respectful of the other culture? So I'm just sort of thinking about, because when you talk about, being in America, where, I don't know, Chinese individuals got a lot of flack because of COVID, and then everybody who looked like they might have some sort of Chinese ancestry, even if it wasn't from China, like Korea or whatever, also got a lot of flack. And that's not to say that the Chinese deserved the flack, because of course they did not. But what I'm saying is that for some people, everyone who looks like this is Chinese. Whether they came from Japan, Korea, Philippines, whatever. So how, and that's the same with African countries, where you're from whatever country. It's like, no, I'm from this country in Africa, or any. It's kind of like any place where because there's so many countries which share an ancestry.
Yeah, just to show that everyone has their own prejudices to work through, right? Because we're talking about, hey, maybe there's spillover persecution, right? That's basically what we're talking about, right? Where it's just like, someone might say, to me, hey, go back to Japan. That actually happened in elementary school once. It said, go back to Japan. It's like, I was born here. I'm a citizen. Like, I don't know why I have to go back to Japan, right? But, same thing. You're just like, you Chinese are terrible. And they're like, but I'm Japanese. And they say, well, you look close enough like them anyway. You're still not helping, right? And we tend to highlight this and say, oh, it's one-sided, it's a problem. But honestly, Jude, I'll share this story and people can react to it how they want, but it is a learning moment. And that's why I'm willing to share uncomfortable things, right? That's what we're talking about with leadership, like not being afraid of difficult moments. So one of my Taiwanese friends, her grandpa was looking through one of her photo albums, and he notices a picture of her and some friends of hers. And he points to one, and, I'll disguise her name. I'll say, he's like, Jennifer. He points to this girl. Is this girl Chinese? And she goes, no, Grandpa, she's Korean. And under his breath, he mutters, they're all Chinese. And it's like, oh, boy. I never would have expected to hear something like that. But all that to say, right, I think the opportunity for things like this, when other people groups are getting persecuted just because of their resemblance to a higher profile group, it's an opportunity to explain to people why they're different. It's not that we're going to say, well, you shouldn't pick on us. They shouldn't, but they need to understand, hey, there's a lot more nuance here. And the fact that you would want to group us together just out of convenience, where is that coming from, right? Like, why are you okay to simply ignore this group and, just say, well, you're close enough to this one, so I'm just going to lump you in with that, right? And normally, right, before I learned coaching techniques and things like that, normally I would just kind of berate them if I were in that situation, right? Just like, how dare you, I can't believe that you would do this. But now I realize that the better weapon is curiosity. Hey, how did you arrive at that conclusion? And even if they resist the questions, well, I don't want to talk about it. It's like, okay, well, hey, when you're ready, please let me know, because I have to remember that it's their problem, not mine, right? I don't have to solve that. Like, as much as I know I need to address the issues and kind of challenge them, maybe in this small moment, if I remember on another podcast I was talking with, and the host was asking, well, should you pick a fight every time that, you have an issue? And I said, you don't have the energy or time for that, right? If there's some guy who's littering that you see in the park, you're not friends with them, but for you to go up to him and call him out on it is probably not a good use of time or energy. So pick the most important relationships, right, to really navigate through. But all that to say, hey, if you happen to deal with spillover persecution, use that as an opportunity to ask questions and get some dialogue, because if you're seeing it directly, is well within your right to just address that head on, just because people need more awareness more than ever. They need more empathy more than ever. Mm-hmm. And unless you are willing to step into that gap and say, hey, here's a situation, I'd like to talk about it with you more. Do you have a moment? Because there's some things I'm curious about and I need your help understanding. And here's why. Okay. Now it's a little better, right? Now it's a little more civil. And now it's just two people talking.
Yeah, I like that, because it's not just, as you say, people that Western society will say are naturally immigrant, because it's the same. It's the same Canadians and Americans, or Scottish and English, or it's like it's any country really. But you have that kind of because we're all from only a few places really. So there's going to be lots of some comparisons. I like what you said about using it as a learning time. I think that's a really great place to stop. Jerry, would you come back again?
Oh, if you'll have me, Jude, I'd love to have a part 2 or 3. We could always use a couple more sequels if there's a lot more to unpack. So yeah, please do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Jerry as much as I enjoyed having it. At the Maverick Paradox, we improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute. To find out more, contact us at judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you.
KLDR Online, Leadership Development Radio.
Hi, this is Judith Germain. Join me on the Maverick Paradox. This is my show where we will discuss maverick leadership in all its guises with experts in their own fields. Have you ever wondered where you can find maverick leadership and what it is? Well, join me on the Maverick Paradox on your leadership development station, KLDR.
Check out the Maverick Paradox with Judith Germain starting the week of September 6th, only on KLDR Online, Leadership Development Radio.
Are you interested in maverick leadership but unsure how to apply it? We can help. Judith Germain has collaborated with David Chislett to produce a 12-part video series on maverick leadership and how to apply it to your creative thinking skills. This will truly get you thinking and putting into action your ability to innovate and execute, truly changing your outcomes. Check out the show notes for the link or contact us on judith@maverickparadox.com for more information. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.